NBC. He's an author, journalist, social justice activist, and an educator. We both share in having a great passion for our youth. He aims to educate underprivileged youth about their rights and responsibilities. He uses the hip-hop culture to increase school engagement among high school students. He fights for change as a revolutionary leader. He's a phenomenal and wonderful speaker, so we're definitely in for a treat. So please give a warm NAACP welcome to Dr. Marc Lamont Hill.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is so good to be here in New Jersey. It is, really. It ain't Philly, you know. It's not, no, it's not. But y'all do what y'all can. Until y'all get rid of Chris Christie, y'all can't say nothing about this state. But seriously, though, it's an important honor to be here because every day, every week, I have the opportunity, the luxury of traveling around this country, talking to different organizations, different schools, different people, and I'm always excited to have the opportunity to share ideas, to discuss politics, to talk about culture, to talk about education. I'm always excited to do that, but I'm especially honored when I get the opportunity to do it for the NAACP. Because the NAACP is such a significant organization. It is really the cultural and political and ideological and social cornerstone of our community, indeed of our nation. You don't really understand the civil rights struggle if you don't understand the NAACP. You don't understand education reform if you don't understand the NAACP. You don't really understand what it means to advocate for the most vulnerable people if you don't understand the NAACP. And so if I get the opportunity to do that and to do that during an election year, oh, show up, I'm going to come, even if it's a Saturday, during football season. I mean, y'all could have it just a few weeks earlier. This would go a lot smoother. But I'm excited to do that, and that excitement is also combined with a sense of purpose and a real sense of soberness about what we face. Because very often those of us who actively fight for civil rights, those of us who actively struggle to make this world better, we can get a sense of self-satisfaction. We can have a sense that because many of us have made it to the middle class, because many of us have gone from working class to middle class, we've gone from entry-level positions to managerial positions, and some of us have moved from Newark to the nicer parts of New Jersey. Because that may have happened, some of us feel a sense, even the fact that we elected Barack Obama to be president 4 years ago gives us a sense, no, that's a good thing. No, that's a good thing, and in fact, we have to reflect on that too. We have to feel good about what we've done. 103 years is a long time to struggle. And so when you look to that date on November 4th of 2008 when Barack Obama becomes president, we should feel good because this is a signpost of our collective maturity as a nation. This is a signpost of what was able to happen. We're talking about just a little over 100 years beyond Plessy versus Ferguson. We're talking about just 54 years beyond the Brown versus Board of Education decision. We're talking about just 43 years after the Voting Rights Act, just 43 years after black folk had the right to vote for real, we were able to elect one of our own children to be the president of the most powerful empire in human history. That suggests something special. That suggests something important. That suggests that we live in a country that doesn't just grow old, but it also grows up. But as we grow up as a nation, we can't become too self-satisfied. We can't become too pleased with our own democratic experiment in such a fashion that we start to pat ourselves on the back and say, look at what we have done, and lose sight of what we have not done. At the same time that we have this expanded middle class and we have some black CEOs and CFOs and all of that stuff, we have more and more people who live homelessly. We have more and more people having their homes foreclosed. More and more people for whom the month is lasting longer than their money. We go around this country and we see the construction of first-class jails and second-class schools. That's our reality, right? That's our real profile. That's our truth. As black people striving for freedom, we have to look at our real profile. We die more at birth. We don't live as long. And in between those two extremes, we're still paying more for less. We're still working harder for less money. We're still going to prisons far more than we're going across the stage at college graduations. That's our real profile. So when we think about our success, when we think about our freedom, we must never lose sight of unfreedom. When we think about our joy, we must never lose sight of the misery that people are catching every single day in the most powerful nation in human history. And you see, that's what it means to be freedom fighters. To be freedom fighters is to be in it for the long haul, to be long distance runners. The NAACP didn't get started last week. No, it emerged out of a moment of profound unfreedom. It emerged at a moment where black humanity was constantly called into question. And so now as we stand here in 2012 wrestling with some of the same fundamental challenges, we have to continue to do the work. So when I come here today, and I ain't gonna hold you too long, but in the time that I'm here, what I'd like us to do is think through what needs to be done in order to move us forward. The first thing we have to do is to listen carefully. To listen carefully. You know, we live in a country where listening doesn't happen so often. You look in Congress, whether it's the House or the Senate, everybody's committed to their agenda, and a big part of their agenda is not listening to the other person's agenda. We live in a world where there's a lot of talk. And sometimes we can confuse talk with listening. If there's a lot of people talking, we just assume that there's some listening happening, but that's not always the case. Sometimes people are talking and they're remaining silent, not because they're listening, but because they're waiting for their turn to say what they wanted to say before you started talking anyway. Some of y'all in marriages like that. I know you can't laugh, brother. I see you. We have 24-hour cable news. MSNBC, CNN. I worked on Fox News. I was at Fox News for 5 years on the visiting team. I was at Fox News for 5 years. There's no shortage of talk. But what moves our nation forward, what will move the NAACP forward, what will move our community forward is not just talk, but listening. Deep listening, what Howard Gardner called charismatic listening. Charismatic speech is cool, but charismatic listening is what gets the job done. Charismatic listening means that we listen to people from whom we don't expect much. Charismatic listening means that we don't just listen to the professor, we don't just listen to the doctor, the lawyer, we listen to the person up the street, we listen to the deaconess at our church, we listen to our grandmama and our great-grandmama. It means that we listen to the homeless man. It means that we have a commitment to understanding the perspectives of people who look and sound and believe and dress and love differently. That's what deep listening is about. Deep listening is a social challenge. It's also a moral challenge because we have to be willing to see the humanity in people who have been dehumanized historically. Whether it's poor people, whether it's women, whether it's gays and lesbians, whether it's people in wheelchairs, whoever it is, we must be committed to listening deeply. It's a necessary thing, but it's not just a social challenge and it's not just a moral challenge. Deep listening, brothers and sisters, is also a political challenge. We are better as a community when we are not divided and turned against one another. That's why I love what Ben Jealous did 6 months ago and a year ago when he began to speak out even more actively for workers' rights. When he began to speak and support the president on marriage equality, what he was doing was understanding that we can't just be locked at the arms singing songs, we must be locked at the circumstance. See, that's what Dr. King understood more than anybody else. He wasn't just a Negro preacher. He was the greatest political strategist, perhaps, of the 20th century because he understood what it meant when we were locked at the arm and locked at the circumstance, Dr. King could spy the political landscape and understand that what happens when John F. Kennedy walks through Harlem holding up a black baby. You've seen it before. You saw Bill Clinton do the same thing, going up Arsenio Hall, playing a saxophone, or watch Hillary and Selma trying to go to church and clap on beat. She ain't quite got it, but she getting there. Hopefully she'll have it by 2016. But when John F. Kennedy walked through Harlem holding up that black baby, it was dismissed as a campaign stunt. Oh, he's trying to get cheap Harlem votes. He's trying to court black votes. You know those liberals up north, that's what they do. He's just trying to make Adam Clayton Powell happy. It was dismissed. A few years later, Bobby Kennedy walks through Appalachia holding up that white baby. His belly's bloated, snot's coming out of his nose. He's crying, he's hungry. We begin our war on poverty. White suffering is less tolerable in this nation. We have a lower threshold for watching the misery of poor white kids. And I'm not trying to make this a black-white thing per se. My point is that when we are locked at the arm, we don't concede to the existence of a world where different children are worth different things. No, we want to live in a world where a baby in Boston or a baby in Birmingham or a baby in Berlin are all worth the same. That's our goal. They should all warrant our heart. They should all want our sympathy and empathy. That's what we want. But he also understood that when we lock our arms at the circumstance, we can convince folk to vote according to their interests even when they don't want to. That when we as workers align with people who are fighting for LGBT rights and people who are fighting for disability rights and who are fighting for environmental rights, instead of us on the left turning towards each other and having a firing squad in a circle, we should open up the group and fire towards our enemy. And our enemy is what? Injustice. That's the struggle. But that involves a commitment to listening deeply. But it also requires us to have a sense of history. To remember truthfully, we live in a world that has such an instant gratification, such an instant need for new information and new ideas and new moments that we sometimes don't have a clear sense of history. It's kind of ironic, right? Because we've built more museums and more mausoleums. We have more commemoration ceremonies, more McDonald's and Burger King placemats. We got more stuff to remember stuff than we've ever had in human history. You watch NBA Wives or Real Housewives of Atlanta or Hip Hop Wives or y'all watch all the wives. Ain't none of them married. I ain't met a married one yet. But the show be over, they had a reunion episode a week later. It's an instant kind of nostalgia. We have TV shows like Best Week Ever. A kind of instant need to remember, which is cool, but the irony of America is at the very same time that we constantly commit to remembering stuff, we are obsessed with forgetting. We always want to forget the pain. We want to forget the trauma. We want to forget the lowest moments. I'm not suggesting that we wallow in misery. That ain't my point. My point is that if we can have a deep sense of history and understand where we've come from, we could appreciate this journey a little bit more. But we could also have a different kind of insight into the present. 2008, I was in Denver. I'm sure many of y'all were in Denver. As Barack Obama on August 28th accepted the Democratic Party's nomination for the presidency. Some of y'all were there, right? Yes. And we stood there in collective joy at this moment of collective maturation of a nation. We were also happy to see a woman, Sarah Palin, become the nominee for the Republican Party. I mean, maybe not the choice. In some ways, I'm happy. I felt like white supremacy was destroyed the night Sarah Palin became the nominee. Sarah Palin's living proof that white supremacy is a myth. Every time she talks, I say, I know for sure white people ain't better than this. But mine too. But I digress. August 28th, 1963 became our reference point. We said, wait a minute, Barack Obama's accepting the Democratic Party's nomination on August 28th. 2008, 45 years ago to the day. Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. And it seemed almost magical. A kind of preordained moment of joy and success for our nation. August 28, 2008, Barack Obama fulfills a dream articulated by Martin Luther King on August 28, 1963. It feels good to think like that, but it feels almost like a form of collective ecstasy to see that completion of a journey for over 45 years. But the problem is, if we remember truthfully, family, we got to go deeper than that. Because before there was an August 28, 2008, there was an August 28, 1963. But before there was an August 28, 1963, there was an August 28, 1955 when Emmett Till is murdered. That's a different August 28. It messes up the Disney-fied picture that we're trying to paint of what happens on August 28th for black folk. It complicates, it doesn't mess it up, it just complicates it. Because on August 28th, that's when we got our real maturity. We can't have a Martin King on August 28th, 63 if we don't have an Emmett Till who was murdered in a kind of state-sponsored act of terrorism. We can't fully appreciate the joy of 2008 if we don't understand the pain of 1955. We can't have a conversation about domestic terrorism in 2012 when we're thinking about the Timothy McVeighs or the Al-Qaedas if we don't understand that the most dangerous and vicious and consistent purveyors of terror in this nation have been the Ku Klux Klan. We can't understand that without context. We can't even understand August 28, 1963 if we don't understand August 27, 1963 when the great W.E.B. Du Bois dies. A footnote to the civil rights struggle, a footnote to the March on Washington. A notice comes over the loudspeaker, the old man has died. The man who helped build this very organization with his hands dies an expatriate in Ghana, dies alone. He's walking up in a house, people coming to see him. He goes to see his friends, they peep the blinds up, sees him and walk away. He dies in a kind of momentary disgrace because we understand, when we have a true moment in history and a true understanding of history, that those who have the courage to fight are often unpopular. Those who have the courage to struggle will not be popular in the moment. Martin Luther King, oh, we love him now. But when he died on April 4th, 1968, he wasn't so popular. He was popular when he was telling Negroes to stand still and get beaten, to march for civil rights. But when he said this war in Afghanistan is wrong, this war in Vietnam is wrong, probably Freudian. He said this war in Vietnam is wrong. They said stay in a Negro preacher's place. When Martin King died on April 4th, 1968, he was unpopular, didn't make People Magazine's Most Admired Americans list, couldn't fill a room this big for a speech, didn't make Morehouse College's Board of Trustees. They said that he was a bad influence on young people because he went to jail too much. He wasn't Lil Wayne, he wasn't T.I., he wasn't Lindsay Lohan, he wasn't going to jail for nothing bad. But this was his real biography, kicked out of his own Baptist convention. This is the truth. Why am I telling you this? Because I don't want y'all to ever think that if you're going to fight for the rights of people who were marginal in 2012, that your fate is going to be any different. You're going to be unpopular too. You're going to be rejected too. You're going to be despised too. To do this work is to make a commitment to doing what's right, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. But we do the work anyway. It's what we've always done. We've always done the work anyway. To do the work anyway means that we must be committed to struggling for sure. Civil rights legislation, Brown versus Board of Education, those laws were co-signed and they were written in blood. People sacrificed and died for this stuff. But But what we need is a deeper analysis. We gotta listen and remember, but we also have to discern wisely, y'all. In 2012, they try to tell us up is down and down is up. That's what Bill Clinton was talking about on Wednesday, right? Arithmetic. They want to cut money out of the budget by taking money from the wealthy and tell us that's going to fix the economy. We're going to get more money by taking it out. This just doesn't make sense. They're trying to tell us that we are in a mortgage crisis, and a housing crisis, and an economic collapse because of poor people. Not because of 30 years of deregulation. Not because we preyed upon the vulnerable and the weak. Black folk who had the credit scores for prime rate loans still got subprime loans. Never mind the fact that George Bush had 1,000 agents deployed when he started his presidency for the sole purpose of detecting fraud in the mortgage markets. By the time he left, there were only 99. Never mind that. Never mind the fact that disproportionately black and poor and Latino and elderly people were getting loans that they couldn't afford. Yeah, never mind that. They picked the 5 poor people who got a mansion and make that the template for what happened. And it's just not true. But if you have that sense of history, you understand that that's what they've always done. 1983, 1984, you could turn on the TV and watch Sally Jesse Raphael or Donahue, Oprah before she got right. I'm the old Oprah, glittery Oprah. And they have, coming up next, the welfare queen. They were painting a picture of what welfare looked like. They picked the 3 people in the whole country that got rich off welfare and make that the face of welfare. Never mind the fact that most people on welfare are white, female, and young. They didn't show that picture. They didn't have to tell us otherwise, they showed us otherwise. They made it common sense that welfare meant poor. You see, remember I said we have to whiten the face of poverty to make it real? Well, you darken the face of poverty to make it irrelevant. So you watch these shows, you watch these specials, and Taquanda, stuff that didn't even make sense. Taquanda from the Taylor homes in Chicago. She has 3 kids and 5 baby daddies. Stuff don't even make sense. How'd she do that? We're creative people, but damn. Just, anyway. But they would make this the face of welfare because they understood that. And so if we have that sense of history and we discern wisely, we say, wait a minute, 2012, they're doing the same thing. They don't say it's race, they just code it racially. So all these public policies where they have the word public in it, get racialized because the commitment of these neoliberals, these economic conservatives, is to do what? To make the public good and make it private interest. So they take everything that's public and make it black and poor. Because then they know you ain't gonna want it. Public school, public housing, public transportation, public options in healthcare, anything public they make you think is black so you won't want it. So what you end up with is white folk who need the public stuff voting against it because they think they're voting for Precious. The founder of this organization, W.E.B. Du Bois, explained to us why that was happening. Perhaps his most important book, written in 1935, Black Reconstruction. First 3 chapters, he talks about the slave, the white worker, and the planter. And he asks himself, why would the white worker support slavery? Because as long as you got slaves, the white worker can't get a job. You see what I'm saying? If you're a white worker, I don't care how much you charge an hour, the slave don't charge nothing. And slave masters don't retire. That's right. So as the white worker, you should want to end slavery so that you can have a chance that you have an economic investment in ending slavery. He said, so why would the white worker not do that? He said, because they would rather identify with the planting class. They'd rather identify with the bosses, the managerial class, and close ranks not around their condition, but close ranks around being white. He said they invest and they accrue the psychic wages of whiteness.
Wow.
So in 2012, we have the same thing. We got poor white workers who are looking at an election cycle right now, who are about to vote for a man who's going to make their economic condition worse instead of voting their interests. We have to get them to divest themselves from the wages of whiteness and invest in a new sense of democracy that is whole, that is humane, that is loving, and God darn it, it is also in their best interests. But we have to understand that through a sense of history. Everything that's being done right now has been done before. But we must discern wisely. We must ask different questions. When I drive through New Jersey, I keep my hand on 10 and 2. I'm scared of y'all, man. My luck ain't that good in Philly, but in Jersey, man, I'm 10 and 2. Because I know that a black man with nothing in his... A black man is the most likely person to get pulled over on a New Jersey highway. Even though, according to the ACLU study, white men are statistically more likely to have guns and drugs in the car. We would have, the hit rate is higher for white people. In other words, statistically, we'd have a better chance if we just pulled all white people over. I'm not suggesting we do that. Relax. You're okay, sir. I mean, it would make for an interesting episode of Cops. You know, Cops, white people edition. But the goal of black folk in the freedom struggle was not to give the gun to the rabbit, right? Our goal was to have a sense of equality that made everybody feel free, that liberated everybody. But as we ask different questions, we have to stop just talking about what it means to be black on a New Jersey highway. We made movies about it. We had that movie New Jersey Drive a long time ago. We have documentaries, we have specials on CNN, all about this phenomenon, driving while black. But what would it mean, instead of talking about driving while black, to ask the real question, what does it mean to patrol while racist? That's the actual question. But we keep putting the lens and the unit of analysis on the people catching hell instead of trying to keep track of those who are offering the hell, those who are in power. We have to ask different questions. We have to ask why I can go in Camden or Trenton or Newark and see a line down the street to get into a public school because they're all lined up and they have to go through metal detectors. Get body search. We spent more money on surveillance equipment in schools than prisons in the last 10 years. And kids are lined up down the street to get into the school to get searched. A parole officer, a probation officer, a school officer, a real police officer, a body scan, a camera, a locker search, a dog sniffing through your legs. There's this whole infrastructure like a prison to get in. It takes you 20 minutes to get into the school, and then once you get in, there's nobody stopping you from leaving. Ask a different question. When we call our kids dropouts, we focus on the kids leaving. What would it mean if we changed our own intellectual lenses and called them pushouts? So that we don't just look at kids leaving, we look at the forces and sources that cause them to leave. What would that mean? What would it mean for us to not just talk about an achievement gap? Yes, we know that black kids bubble in the answers at a less successful rate than the white kids in their class. Yes, we know that statistically. And we also know, as an aside, that white folk have an achievement gap with Asians. We don't talk about that, but the white folks have an achievement gap with Asians. You know, 90% of white people are killed by the white people. We don't call it white-on-white crime, right? We have a way of pathologizing our stuff, but the deeper issue here for me is, instead of calling it an achievement gap, what if we called it a funding gap? What if we called it an investment gap? A teaching gap, a mentoring gap, a support gap, an infrastructure gap, a care gap, a parenting gap, a love gap. If we change the focus from that kid who bubbled in C instead of B into all the things that got him or her in that place, maybe we could get an outcome that's different, but it means we need to ask different questions. It's 2012 and there are 2.5 million Americans incarcerated. When Martin King died, there were 250,000 people incarcerated. Over the last 40 to 50 years, we've gone from 250,000 people in our nation's prisons, which we thought was a travesty then, to 2.5 million Americans incarcerated. 1 in 100 American adults incarcerated. We talk about the axis of evil, but we have more people incarcerated than Iraq, Afghanistan, North Korea. Throw in Cuba, throw in Venezuela if you want, all put together. You look at any developed nation, first world nation, you go to France, you go to Canada, Germany, don't matter. Take 2 of them, add them up, we still have more. 1 in 3 black men between 20 and 28 on parole, probation, incarcerated. 1 in 3. 1 in 3. And black women are catching up. Latinos, 1 in 5. So we have to ask ourselves, how over a 50-year, 40-year period have we increased the prison population tenfold? Did we raise a generation of criminals? Did we raise a generation of slow runners? Just can't get away from the cops as fast anymore? Or did we create a set of laws that have criminalized our babies? We must ask different questions, y'all. We spent $1 trillion on the war on drugs, and drugs are cheaper, easier to get, and stronger than ever. We lost. Unless the war on drugs wasn't about that. We've taken medical problems and criminalized them. I'm not advocating drug use. What I am advocating is a different approach to drug abuse understanding. We closed down all the funding for mental institutions. We put people on the street. Then on the state level, we criminalized being on the street. Then people who used to get medical treatment, mental health care, now are self-medicating through drugs. Then we put them in prison where they're subjected to more trauma, more abuse, no mental health care. Then they get out, and guess what? They still have a drug addiction, they still have mental health, they're more traumatized, and they have a criminal record, so they can't get access to public housing, public education, and they can't get a job, and guess what? In many states, they can't vote. Second-class citizenship, what Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow. This is our reality. These are the questions we have to ask. How do we change that? But they're trying to tell us that we should make it easier for people to get excluded from the polls. There's voter fraud. I was so glad Ben said that. You have a better chance. You have a better chance of getting struck by lightning at the front steps of a mansion that you won on Publishers Clearinghouse than you do of getting an instance of voter fraud in America. But we understand when we look more deeply that this isn't about voter fraud. It ain't about the 7 people that voted the wrong way in America. It's about the tens of millions of people who voted the way they wanted to and not the way the Republican Party wanted them to. Republicans don't win by genius. They don't win by persuasive argument. They win by the margin of us who don't make it to the polls. It's really that simple. I know y'all gotta go. But what do we do after this? We've discerned wisely, we've asked all these questions, we have a sense of history. But what do we do? Because it doesn't make sense to have a tank full of gas and not go nowhere, right? We know all this, and what are we gonna do? We're gonna leave here, buy some jewelry outside and go home? No.
Keep on keeping on.
We gotta keep on keeping on. And what does that look like? It looks like acting bravely. That's it. And not just an activist, but an organizer. I can get 50 million people to come up and show up for something that we organize. But to get someone to actually do the organizing, that's the challenge. That's the challenge. Dr. King said that, right? He said there's a certain kind of excitement you get, even from the dogs and the water hoses, but the day after. Stuffing envelopes is just hard work. Calling people, giving out flyers, sending out blasts, that's hard work. You don't get on Channel 6 for that. You don't get locked up. You don't get to tell stories about that. You just got to do the work. To act bravely is to commit to organizing for something that's bigger than y'all. I go go to college campus, some of y'all at schools where there's only 50 of y'all, some of y'all young people, y'all on college campus where there's 50 black people. And it'll be 50 black people in 25 organizations. Everybody president and vice president. That ain't about the organization, that's about you. We have to be committed to joining and working with organizations even when we don't get the microphone, even when we don't get the attention, even when we don't get in the newspaper, just because the work needs to be done. Brave action means that when we leave here, we must commit to an organization. Yes, be active in your NAACP. Don't just don't donate money, donate time. Work on committees that you're not chairing. And when you have a falling out, when something happened at the chapter and you decide that you don't like the way the direction of leadership is going, stay there, fight through it, don't leave. Work harder. Otherwise, it's about you. And we ain't got time. There's too many people who are not eating and not working and catching hell and being abused for this to be about you. Think about something bigger than you. That's the tradition we come from. People who fought for something that they wouldn't even see. Our great-grandparents worked hard. They worked 12 and 15 and 18-hour days washing other people's clothing, cleaning other people's houses. That's the irony of black folk, right? They said we lazy, but they made us slaves. They said we dirty, but we clean their houses. They said we uncivilized, but we raise their children. But they did that for a world that they wouldn't even see because they knew that we would enjoy it. Think about what our grandmothers and great-grandmothers would have been given to be able to see Barack Obama stand in front of the world as the President of the United States of America. Think about the sacrifices they made for you to be sitting in this seat. Think about the sacrifices of work they made nursing other people's children and cleaning those clothes and walking 6 and 7 and 8 miles. We complain about driving 12 miles to a meeting. They walked 10 miles to clean for somebody else to produce a world that they wouldn't even see, but that you would enjoy. They said, I don't know what we're going to be, but I know that we're going to be, and that's enough. That's what this tradition is about. That's what this work is about. It's about building on something bigger. Acting bravely means that we have to tell the truth when it's hard, when it might compromise our popularity. And it doesn't just mean telling the truth to white people or Republicans or Tea Partiers or Fox News. It means telling the truth to us too. Because some of this is about us. We need more grants in the school, but we can go to school right now and read to some kids. Black men, we can be in these schools as role models even when there's no teachers there. We know that, really, think about this, man. What makes a kid less likely to go to jail, get pregnant, contract HIV/AIDS, or drop out? Investment, mentoring, early education, early childhood education, boys and girls clubs, sports. So why aren't we coaching? Why aren't we mentoring? Do we need government for that? Yes, but we can do it without them. We always have. We didn't think our IQs would go up if white people were in the room. That's not what Brown versus the Board of Education was about. It was about some books being there. About a school being there. We have the school, we have the books. I was in Cook County Jail visiting. Reverend Jesse Jackson, we were standing there a couple years ago. It was Christmas Day, and we were standing there, and we said, how many of you all are here for a nonviolent drug offense? Hands go up. Almost every person in there was black, my age, and therefore nonviolent drug offense. We understand that this war on drugs has ensnared so many young black men. How many of you finished high school? Almost no hands go up. Because we understood that the relationship between dropping out and incarceration is high. We understand the relationship between early literacy failure and incarceration is high. We understood that. How many of you are here for a nonviolent drug offense? Hands go up. How many of you are under 25? Hands go up. How many of you finished high school? Almost no hands go up. How many of you have children? Hands go up. 2 kids. Hands go up. 3 kids. More hands go up. We stopped asking. He said, how many of you want to shut this prison down right now? Who wants to shut this prison down right now? They said, yeah, what do we do? He said, don't come back no more. There's mass incarceration, but we don't have to give in to it. There's drugs in our corners. We don't have to sell them. We darn sure don't have to smoke them. There are old books in our schools, but we can still read them. We have challenges that make it more difficult to parent, but we still have to be parents. The work is there, but we have to do it too. Telling the truth is about that level of responsibility as well. That's brave action, family. In conclusion, after we do all this working, we have to do one more thing. We have to hope relentlessly. We have to hope relentlessly. When I say hoping relentlessly, the president talked about this on Thursday, and I'm glad he did, because hope has become this watered down thing. It just means everything's gonna be all right. Hope doesn't mean that everything's gonna be all right. It's not blind optimism. Hope means that the world is bad, there are significant obstacles, but I'm going to fight in spite of those obstacles, maybe even because of those obstacles. Hope is what keeps us struggling in spite of the odds. Hope is what says that we as a nation have shifted from century to century, decade to decade, and progressed. Not fully, we've made some steps back as well, but we've progressed largely. Hope says that I'm going to continue on that journey. Hope says that yes, we have real enemies. Hope says that there are real people trying to destroy this nation. Hope says that there are people who are trying to fragment and separate us as a community, as an organization, as a political party. Hope says that there are real challenges to ending poverty and real challenges to mending the fissures in Washington. We understand all of that. Hope doesn't ignore that stuff. Hope says we don't have to be prisoner to it. Hope is what the great Howard Thurman was talking about when he said, never ever scale down your dreams to the level of that which is your immediate experience. In other words, you ain't got to be prisoner to an event. You don't have to be prisoner to a circumstance. You don't have to be prisoner to these statistics. It's about 10 words. I do not have to be what I once was. We do not have to be what we are now. No one saw 10 years ago a skinny state senator from Illinois would be the first president. Nobody saw that coming. But it happened because we believed and we struggled and we fought. That's been the courage that has always gotten us over. Young, old, rich, poor, black folk, we all come from the same place, the same tradition. And we've all managed to struggle and win when we've committed to loving ourselves and our community and this nation in spite of itself. I mean, think about the love ethic of black folk, yo. I mean, really. When slavery ended, we were the first people to want to run for office. We wanted to vote. Black folk believed in democracy when against all evidence to the contrary. Black folk loved America in spite of itself. And we have to continue to love each other in spite of ourselves, because we entered an election cycle right now, y'all, and we have to continue to fight and be the Harriet Tubman of our generation. We have to be that next generation of folk, and I'm using Harriet Tubman in particular because so often this conversation is reduced to black men and black male heroes, but really it's been black women who have led us through the muck and mire of America forever. Black women who sacrificed, black women who struggled, black women who gave their very lives to produce that world that we talked about, the world that is not yet. Women have always done it, even when there was a man in front not making no sense. She was in the back saying, yeah, baby, you're right. And who better than Harriet Tubman to model that for what we have to do in 2012? Because that's what we have to do. We have to drag people to a new sense of freedom. This little black woman would take big big strapping Negroes who were in slavery and make them free. She said, I freed hundreds of Negroes. I could have freed thousands if only they would have known they were slaves. Our job first is to spotlight unfreedom, to show the freedom. We got to work our way to freedom. We got to organize our way to freedom. We got to struggle our way to freedom. And it ain't just a black thing. Like Zora Neale Hurston said, all your skin folk ain't your kinfolk. It's going to be some black folk working against you. There's going to be a whole lot of John Browns, a whole lot of white folk working with you. We must organize as a community against the odds. Big money Wall Street is the enemy. Unchecked, I ain't killing none of y'all for making money, but unregulated capitalism is an enemy. White supremacy, homophobia, misogyny, patriarchy, sexism, it's all an enemy that we must fight. We must literally, like David against Goliath. I remember Jesse Jackson told me this. He said, we are like David and they're like Goliath, and we must literally take our rocks and throw them at Goliath. But right now, family, we are so disorganized that we don't realize that all we need is what David had, which was this rocks. We have rocks laying all around us that we can use against the enemy, but we don't understand it. But on November 6th, we must pick up those rocks. You know why? Because in Ohio, we could lose an election by 100,000 votes, and there's 300,000 people out of work unregistered right now. In Pennsylvania, we could lose this election by 400,000 votes, and there's 600,000 college students right now who are unregistered. In Michigan, there are people who have had their unions broken down, and Mitt Romney could win that state by 75,000 votes, and there are 2 million people who are currently not eligible to vote who could get that slot. All around the country, there are people who could choose jobs over jails, peace over war. We must pick those rocks up that are lying around us, because those 100,000 votes are rocks laying around. Those 75,000 votes in Pennsylvania are rocks laying around. Those votes in Ohio are rocks laying around. So we must pick up the slingshot, pick up those rocks, and vote on November 6th for justice, for democracy, and for freedom, and continue the struggle that we have done for the last 103 years. God bless all of you. Thank you so much. I love you.